And so let's bring it down to regular daily life for a moment, because I've noticed, especially a lot of light workers and starseeds don't recognize, number one, when they're triggered, or number two, that they have trauma in their history. And we use the term trauma, it's very general, and there's something in many circles in psychology we call big T trauma and little t trauma. So big T trauma is, of course, abuse, someone died in your childhood, just all kinds of, extremes like that, which is actually way more common than people realize. You just bury it in your unconscious. It's a part of the mechanism for survival. But also there's a lot of little T traumas. You could go through a day in childhood and experience several little traumas all day long. And a lot of people don't realize that those are traumas. A conflict with a sibling, for instance, losing your favorite toy, things like that. Those are traumas to the self at that level of development. And
Mhm.
if that is not consoled, if that is not processed through, then it's like what I call like a photograph or a videograph. It's frozen in time, and then it's stuck in your aura. And so, understanding and being able to recognize when you're feeling anxiety, when you're feeling, people say, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. I'm like, okay, frustration is a form of anger.
Yeah.
Right. And so learning to recognize that, and a lot of times it doesn't even reach the conscious mind because it's an automatic mechanism to distract yourself the moment you start to feel discomfort, whether it's to check, social media or go eat something or, talk to somebody, text somebody. These are all a lot of times distractions because you're actually triggered and you're not consciously realizing it. So, Chokai, can you talk a little bit more about that to help people recognize what we're talking about? Because it goes on all day long in our adulthood, and those are brilliant moments, choice moments to become more conscious and to bring that back into wholeness through love. And sometimes we have to process those emotions, that we have to identify them, bring them forward, release them, and also recognize, okay, what's the underlying belief, and make that new choice. But we can't do it as long as those triggers are driving us and distracting us. We need to become more conscious and conscientious in our day-to-day lives. And it may sound exhausting, but it's actually not. It's integrated into your personal and spiritual growth path. If that's your priority, it becomes quite natural with everything you do as you go about your day. So can you share more about that, Chokai?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start by going back to what you said a minute ago. It's like, it's like feeling anger, but I'm calling it frustration. Well, that's minimization, and that's very typical of someone with trauma, to
Yes.
minimize it, right? And so it's like, but it's also because it's like there's this judgment of the emotion, right? It's bad to feel anger or whatever. And a lot of people have the whole bad to feel anger thing. But if there was something wrong with feeling anger, then anger wouldn't exist as an experience in this version of reality. Okay. It's not the feeling, it's how, whether or to what degree someone expresses that feeling. Okay. You combine anger and blame, and then you can create some additional chaos and challenges that aren't helpful to anybody. But owning the feeling, it's like, yeah, I'm feeling angry about that. And in that context, it's justified. And accepting that the feeling is justified. It's not about behaviors, it's about the feeling state itself. And accepting that all emotions that arise from the ego exist for a purpose. And all of them are to communicate messages, right? They're there to communicate very important messages to your conscious, or we'll say aware mind. What people call conscious here isn't conscious by any stretch from our definition, but that's another discussion. Um, and so it's like, first, it's letting it be okay to feel what you feel. Okay. It's letting it be okay to not be perfect. And we find it quite intriguing that there are so many who uh, are both aspiring to perfection while at the same time affirming perfection, while not noticing or even admitting to any kind of imperfection. which then prevents you from actually progressing at all. And perfection is not required. And for that matter, what people call perfection in this version of reality, even if you have a definition for it, doesn't really exist anyway, you know, because it depends upon what standard you're using to judge. But, perfectionism is really just shame, and recognizing what's beneath that behavior or that attitude or that desire, okay, what's motivating that is much more powerful than than the, just noticing or trying to wrangle the outer manifestation. And the thing is, if your objective is love, if your aspiration is for, rather than perfection, authenticity, which by the way is perfect.
Right.
If your aspiration is for authenticity, then that automatically includes love. And not only is it about recognizing that you are loved, but it's about actively bringing love to you, allowing love into you. Okay. It's not just about expressing love for others, it's about expressing love for yourself. It's about accepting love for yourself. And I'm not talking about the conditional or codependent entanglements that people think of as love. I'm talking about unconditional love, true self-compassion, true self-validation, self-acceptance, those kinds of things, which are very powerful to practice. And if you're struggling to overcome some internal obstacle like that, some trigger or some issue, look to what degree you are or are not practicing self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-validation. Because I promise you, you're not, if you're struggling. Okay, one of those things is missing. And so rather than try to tackle the quote quote monster head on, start with that self-acceptance, start with that self-validation, start with that self-compassion. And you'll find that the snarling Rottweiler you thought you were dealing with becomes this cute little stuffed puppy that you can fit in the palm of your hand, and not such a big deal to deal with after all. Okay.
Oh, see, a lot of it has to do with programming and assumptions that we made because of trauma when we were young and don't remember that we made these conclusions. Okay, I have to be perfect in order to be safe. I have
Exactly.
to match this standard that they're imposing, society, family, church, whatever you got, and a combination of that. People are trying to live up to that. And it doesn't matter how long you've been on the spiritual awakening path. If that stuff is still running in your unconscious, it's still driving you and your choices. It drives a lot of healers, for instance, who are trying so much to help fix others because they're coming actually from a place of judgment, judging pain and judging the difficulty. They wouldn't call it judgment, but that's actually a hidden driver that's their own pain they're trying to resolve through trying to fix others, help others, fix, when there's really nothing wrong. All of it is a part of a grand unfoldment in each individual's journey and the bigger scope. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, indeed, because you know what people call a problem is really not a problem. It's just a condition in consciousness, right? The word problem automatically has a negative or adverse interpretation associated. Even a math problem uh, can be hard or difficult. That's the implication. It's going to be difficult. And yet, most of those things, if they're seen correctly, if they're seen through loving eyes, seen through your soul's perspective, it's not really a problem at all. It's simply a misunderstanding. Okay. It's a conflict in consciousness. And thank goodness that you're aware enough to even notice those conflicts in consciousness so that you can resolve them. Because, it's the difference between, I can think of it this way. It's like you are light, okay? But you can either be a light bulb which has its energy scattered all over the place, or you can be a laser beam, which can cut through steel. So it's the same photons, but the photons in a light bulb aren't pointed in any particular direction. They're just haphazardly spraying out. But the photons in a laser beam are all focused in the same direction, and they're quite powerful as a consequence of that. And so basically you're evolving to, you're starting with being a light bulb, and maybe a light bulb that's under a inside a cardboard box, or maybe it's buried in the mud, or however you want to carry off that metaphor, right? But your evolution is about refining your consciousness until every photon is pointed in the same direction. And that means reclaiming, means gathering to your heart these various parts that have been buried or set aside, or suppressed, repressed, whatever the fancy words for it is. And when you bring them home to your heart, then you align, and the energy that had been used to basically prevent you from feeling that discomfort, or from even noticing that discomfort, okay, and trying to maintain itself, can then be reallocated to flowing in alignment with your divine expression. And so you naturally become more powerful and more focused with every one of those dynamics that you resolve. And so it's really about taking the attitude of, I'm grateful that I have the capacity to be aware of this conflict so that I can resolve it, unify my consciousness even further, and become even more empowered as a result. Okay. And it really is just the attitude, because the beliefs, your conditioned beliefs, are very right, that the way people are conditioned in childhood is often upside down and backwards from actual reality. And it's like, you shouldn't feel this way. So many people have heard those terms from authority figures, and yet you are feeling that way. And so the assumption then is, I must be bad, I must be wrong, and that's shame, certainly judgment. It can certainly develop into shame, when in fact, what's wrong, if you want to call it that, is believing that you shouldn't feel that way when you do. Okay. Because the designers of, if you want to think of source presence as being the ultimate designer of these beautiful egos that allow you to interface with this version of reality, knew exactly what they were doing. Okay. And it's an extraordinary mechanism, this ego consciousness, and it allows you to experience things that you can't in oneness. And that's magnificent. It's not a problem. It's not bad. It's not a fault. It's not a shortcoming. It's actually quite extraordinary. Okay. And there are extraterrestrials right now observing humanity, scratching their head, going, I don't get it. How are they surviving, carrying all these conflicts around with them, all these places where their energy is divided? Well, it's because you have a very extraordinary mechanism called an ego that can handle those conflicts, can handle those opposites. Okay. And that's something to appreciate, not something to regret or feel bad about. So anything seen from the soul's perspective, anything seen from that higher level oneness consciousness perspective, is going to look very different than it does from a 3D perspective. So, if you're looking at anything in your life as a problem, then you're misunderstanding what you're seeing. Not a problem. It's an invitation to evolve. It's an invitation to recollect yourself, if you will. And that means greater empowerment, greater potential for joy, peace, love, harmony, and all the cool stuff that comes with that. So I may not have fully answered your question, but we get off on tangents.
It all covers the bases.